The Ordinary Discussion Podcast.
Broken eardrum or something. Like I'm thinking like the movies, like I don't even know what a broken eardrum would be. Yeah. So I'm like feeling my ears to see if like they're bleeding or which I don't even know if that happens.
Guys, welcome back to the Ordinary Discussions Podcast, where we have an extraordinary guest with us today. I'm so excited for you guys to hear about this person that we have on with us. Let me tell you some of the things that she has accomplished. She is a 3-time Olympian and world-class athlete and one of the U.S. most decorated female World Cup slalom racers, racing in 12 World Cup seasons with 6 World Cup wins. If that's not enough, 20 podiums and 55 top 10 finishes. That's incredible. She's a 5-time U.S. national slalom champion and a 3-time Olympian, 1998, 2002, 2006, and she is in the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame, as well as the National Polish American Sports Hall of Fame. We are so beyond blessed to have this guest with us today. I can't wait for you to hear from her some of the stories that she has to share with us. But before we get into that, do not forget to like, follow, subscribe wherever you're watching from. That helps us to grow here on the Ordinary Discussions podcast and help share our message of disciples making disciples with others. So thank you for being with us. Don't forget to rate our podcast and stick with us. We don't want you to miss an episode. That would be horrible if that happened. So thank you for doing that in advance. And without further ado, let me kick it over to our host, Jeremy. Jeremy, how are you doing? You ready for this?
I'm ready. Are you?
I'm ready. I'm beyond ready.
All right. Well, hey, let's do this. Kristina, do we say Koznick or Landa?
I mean, I suppose if you're going to list, what I did, no one would know it as Landa, so probably Koznick.
So Koznick, Landa. We'll call you
Okay.
Koznick. We'll call you Koznick today.
It gets confusing.
I know Kristina as Kristina Landa, but these accomplishments were done under Koznick.
Correct.
Yes.
That is correct, yes.
So what did we miss? I mean, that was a big list, but what did we miss? I know there's more.
I don't know. I mean, maybe a couple world championships in there. 6 of them, yeah.
6 world championships? Yeah. That wasn't on our cheat sheet.
It's okay. You guys did a good job. You did a good job.
6 world. So what is a world championship? Tell me about that.
So the Olympics are every 4 years, and then the actual world championships are every other year. So when you're competing, it's actually more challenging to make it to the Olympics than world championships because there's a few more spots. Whereas like when you go to the Olympics, the United States of America only has 4 places. So you can be ranked 10th in the world, but if there are 4 girls from America better than you, you're not going to the Olympics. So the Olympics is actually really difficult to get into. And then the pool is a lot smaller when you're competing, whereas world champs is a little bit bigger.
But
yeah,
tell me if I'm wrong. Go ahead, Aaron.
I was gonna say, so Jeremy has more of a chance of getting into the Worlds than the Olympics. Is what
I have
saying.
no chance at any of them. Period.
Either way, I guess they're hard. They're both difficult. It's a challenge to get into both of them. But the world champs happen more frequently. How about I say it that way?
Yeah. And how many did you make?
6.
Wow, that's incredible. And so the World Cup events, like finishing high in the World Cup. Like not to us because we think the Olympics is everything, but to the ski racing community, that's actually the bigger deal, right?
It is because there are way more people racing. So, for instance, like I was saying, there's only 4 from each country allowed at the Olympics. Whereas, Austria, when I was racing, Austria was a powerhouse, and they used to have, 10 guys in the top 25 in the world, but only 4 would get to go to the Olympics. So when you'd race in a World Cup, really, anybody can win. That's what's kind of neat. There's so much competition. So in a World Cup, to win a World Cup is a really big deal, yeah.
And forgive me, I'm really not this ignorant. I'm just helping the audience out. But like finishing high in the World Cup, like the overall year. How does it work? There's a yearly race, not a race, but a skier of the year. I don't
standings.
know.
No, so there's standings. So it's
I
used to explain it like car racing.
Yeah.
So a lot of people understand in car racing, there's a certain amount of races throughout the year, but if you place first, you get 100 points. If you're second, you're 80 points. If you're third, you get 60 points.
Yeah.
And then those will add up over the season. And the culmination is like, hey, whoever gets the most points at the end of the year is considered first in the world. They're the overall champion.
And that's probably a greater honor than a gold medal, you think?
Well, it's all about
You have to be
it's
careful
all
what you
about
say.
perspective. It's all about perspective, right? Because a gold medal is it's sought after and it's a big deal, and it's much more promoted as outside of the ski racing world. So in the ski racing world, to win an overall title is huge, and for your ski sponsors and anybody in that skiing world. But when you go outside the ski world, the Olympics, World Championships, that's where the stress and the importance is put, I guess.
Yeah. Wow. So one thing we didn't mention is a pretty big accomplishment. You have 4 kiddos.
I do now. Yeah, changed a little bit since skiing. I do. I have 4 kids. They're all between the ages of 6 and 12 now, and yeah.
And she made time for us, man. Wow.
They're watching Christmas movies right now.
Hopefully not burning down the house.
Hopefully not. Yeah.
Yeah, so we've got 4 potential Olympians coming out of this family.
They don't like skiing. They love skiing, but they don't want to ski race. At least the older 2. They're all into hockey. So
hockey.
maybe I'll be, on the side of the Olympics watching hockey. I have no idea, but it won't be ski racing, I don't think.
But you play hockey now, right?
Yeah, just for fun.
I
I
know.
have to be competitive. Like there's just a little part of me that has always been competitive, and I like to feed that fire a little bit.
Yeah,
So.
That's awesome. So I'm fascinated by the Olympics because that's what I know, right? That's what I see. So tell me so for 12 years, you were one of the top 4. I mean, 3 Olympics in a row, you made it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a pretty long run, 12 years.
Yeah.
So, what is that like? Like, what Olympics did you go to?
So I was in 1998 was in Nagano in Japan, and 2002 was in Salt Lake in Utah, which was amazing, and quite an opportunity to get to participate in the Olympics in your own country.
Yeah.
And then 2006 was in Italy, in Torino.
Wow.
Yeah. But I don't know. It's one of those things. It feels like forever ago. It feels like a whole different world. I mean, you're a parent, and like my kids are like, yeah, mom, whatever, like you're just mom.
Yeah.
But when I look back at it, it definitely was, it was quite a way to grow up. Ultimately from 15, I made the national team, and
15.
Yeah, I know. I think about that. My daughter's 12, and I just think like, I'm sorry, where are you going? Right?
Yeah,
like
Caden,
I literally,
my son is 15.
Yep.
And I can't imagine him.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
Yeah, so I traveled around the world starting at 15, and I was really blessed. I was so fortunate that my dad was able to travel with me. I mean, and I still talk to him now. I'm like, oh my goodness, the amount of money you spent to come and be with me, and I just tell him how grateful I am and how I know now as a parent, right? The things you do not think of as a child.
Oh, I know.
And then you think of as a parent, but I told him all the time, thank you to both my parents. Thank you so much for making the sacrifices you made and for being there, because I can't imagine being 15 and being on the road all by myself. I just can't. It was hard. It was definitely hard. So at 15, I made the national team. And I mean, the story could go on and on, but ultimately I raced World Cup and traveled around Europe and tried to make it, because when I made the national team, I was ranked, in the 40s and 50s in the world.
Oh,
which,
just 40? Come on.
Which doesn't really, you can race in the World Cup, but it doesn't really, cement you there. I mean, you got to do something in order to stay. I mean, it's really like any sport, right? You can kind of hang out, but you got to get called up, right, to the big leagues, and you got to perform. And when you perform at the big leagues, then you get to stay, So it took me a little while to move up from that, I mean, what people are like you would say, right? Oh my gosh, you're 45th in the world. What do you mean? That's fantastic.
Yeah.
But that wasn't my ultimate goal, right?
Sure.
My ultimate goal was to be in the big leagues and race World Cup constantly. So it took me a few years, and by the time I was about 21, that was a huge breaking point for me. I actually remember sitting on the chairlift, and I'd almost wanted to quit about 4 days earlier, and I had called my dad and I said, I don't want to do this anymore. And I remember he was like, let me call you right back. And he hung up the phone. And I was like, wait, what? Now, we didn't have cell phones. Keep that in mind. There were no cell phones. So he had to call the hotel phone. And he called me right back. And he said, you know what? If you don't want to do it anymore, he said, that's okay with us. Like, we understand, but just do me one favor. He said, just don't quit because of anybody else. Just make sure you quit because you don't want to do it anymore. And I said, okay. And I hung up the phone and I thought, but I love ski racing. Like, I love this. And so that was it. I was like, all right, well, then I'm just going to do this for me. And that was a huge game changer. And it sounds silly because obviously I'd already had so much success, but I needed that moment to realize, like, wait, I'm doing this because I love it and nobody else, you know, not for any other reason, right? My parents never pushed sports on me. They were always like, we love you no matter what, win or lose, doesn't matter. But it was that moment that I really realized it in my heart. And I went out that World Cup and I just thought, okay, doesn't matter. Like, I'm doing this because I love it. Yeah. And if I win or I fall flat on my face, they're still going to be at the airport when I get home to pick me up, you know? And that was a huge one. And so I actually went that race. I ended up getting 4th. And from that point on, I never turned back. So from 21 until I was 30, when I retired, I was actually ranked in the top 8 in the world the whole time. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So that's probably truly, of all the stats you listed, whenever anyone asks me what is my favorite, stat or what am I most proud of, I would always say truly that I was able to stay in the top 8 in the world for, 9 years.
That's amazing. Yeah. And so we live in the same town as another ski racer, Michaela Schifrin, right?
I've heard of her.
Yeah,
I've heard of her. Yeah.
And another one just down the road, which is Lindsey Vonn, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Do you like, are you guys in the same circle at all? Is it like a fraternity, or is it almost like?
I mean, there is an understanding, right? Like we come from the same. We have an understanding, right? I went through the same things they're going through. And so there's an understanding, but I'm too old to be in the same circle as Michaela. I hate to say that. I know. But
we're not
Lindsay
old.
Lindsay and I were on this team together. Like, we overlapped. And so I know her very well. But Michaela and I only know her like by introduction. And I mean, we know who each other are. So if she walked into the room, we would gravitate more towards each other because it'd be like, okay, we know each other. Like, she knows I have her back, and I know, you know what I mean?
Am I right in saying that, and I could be completely wrong, so correct me if I am, but until recently, when Michaela kind of took off, you were the most decorated World Cup women's racer?
I was. Well, for slalom, I was for sure.
Slalom, yeah.
And it was actually kind of funny because right during my induction into the Hall of Fame, we're
going to talk about that.
No, but it wasn't funny. It's funny now, right? Everything's funny when you look back, and not like it's not it's not as funny when you're in it. But they were writing out my, kind of a list of what I've done and why I'm being inducted into the Ski Hall of Fame. Yeah. And they had said, she'd won the most, the winningest, I don't even know if that's a word, the winningest slalom skier, in American history. Well, the guy was nervous to put it in there because Michaela at that point had won less than me. Yeah. And they're like, oh, but she's going to win another one this year. And then we don't have to take that sentence out. And I was like, oh my goodness. I was like, it doesn't matter. Just put whatever, right? I was like, just give me another week. Just one more week.
It's dated. People can do their research.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So, but no, she has far surpassed that. And it's fun to watch her for sure. I mean, she has taken it to a whole new level, and it doesn't take away from anything I've done, but I do have an unbelievable admiration for what she's done.
Yeah, well, what you've done is quite impressive.
Thank you.
I agree. What is the training regimen like for being able to stay at that level for so long? The only thing that I equate to Winter Olympics is the Cool Runnings movie.
Yes, that is a great movie.
Jamaican bobsled team.
Yeah, it was just like that, I'm sure.
That is definitely not an indication of the training that has to happen, but like, I imagine it's way more than anyone knows. Like, could you just walk us through kind of what like a Monday through, Friday looked like for you, like in training to be able to achieve that?
It's interesting. Yeah. By the way, great movie. If you haven't seen it, go see it. It is good. Like I showed it to my kids. I was like, you guys got to see this movie. They didn't apparently find it as fascinating as me, but it's older, you know, it's not,
that was our generation.
Exactly right.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
But it was, that's what I actually miss the most, honestly, is the training. So I am very retired. I retired in 2006. So you can do the math on that. But I thought I would miss the competing the most, but I actually missed the training. Like I really, when it comes down to it, every part of my day was scheduled from when I would eat to when I would even take rest. When we were training, when we were watching video, when we were doing, we called dryland training. So when we weren't on snow, and I actually missed the structure and the training more than I miss the competition too. I miss it all, but that's what I found when I started having kids. My husband was like, wow, our kids are really on a schedule, you know? And finally, I think it was actually during the induction to the Hall of Fame, and we were doing a bunch of different interviews, and he was like, I totally get it now. Like you schedule our kids because that's your happy place. Like you do that because that's what you know. So to give you an idea of, I mean, in every season was different, but we would literally follow snow throughout the whole year. So wherever the snow was, that's where we were. Whether it be, if we, in the summer, we'd go to South America, we'd be either in Chile or Argentina. Sometimes we'd go to New Zealand or Australia. And then in the winter months, we'd be in Europe, in North America or Scandinavia. And we would get up. If it was a training session, like a training series, we would always get up early in the morning. Sometimes we'd have to get on to the gondola or whatever, you know, before they always opened before the area would open for us. And then we'd go up, we'd train until lunch, have lunch, come back. You'd get a little bit of time to take a nap, which my kids think is hysterical, but I love, like, I took a nap every day of my life. Now I don't. Now I don't get to do that, but I did back then. Get to take like a short nap before we go do dryland training. So we'd go out and whatever was not on snow was considered dryland training. So
dry land?
Dry land,
okay,
yeah.
Dry land, yeah.
And so, I mean, I guess if you think about it, it makes sense, but that's what we called it. So, and then you'd either, you know, whether we'd play soccer or we'd be lifting or whatever that may be, you know, in that series of time. It all depended, you know, like I said, what we were doing. If we had a race coming up, obviously we would treat the training differently. You'd taper, and that wasn't my job, thank goodness. They just told me what to do. Yeah. So I was like, okay, you want me to go run intervals today? Okay, here we go. And then we would get back from that, get cleaned up, go to dinner, and then we'd always watch video from our day of training after dinner, and then we couldn't get to bed quick enough, and it would start again. And that was kind of every day, and then every once in a while we'd have a day off. And that was
the entire year?
Yes. And we would get breaks, obviously, like when the competitive season was over in the spring, you usually would get like a 3-week break from everything. Like just generous. Like, okay, I know, go be free for 3 weeks. And I would just usually go home and stay at home. It depends what age I was, right? I was still in high school for some of this too. And we would just be at home and rest, and then it would be like time to go. And when in the summer, when we weren't on snow, we would do 3 workouts a day, you know, working out. I miss that too. I miss being in that good of shape.
Well, by the way, don't let her kid you. She's still an animal. Absolutely. Everybody I know that works out with you is like, oh my gosh, Kristina is amazing. I'll never forget the first time I met you. You probably don't, not that you would remember, but I do. I remember when I meet like Olympic athletes. You don't remember when you meet middle-aged males that are washed out. But no, it was at Awana's. We were picking up our kids. I don't expect you to remember this.
No, I
but
do
you
actually.
You had a U.S. ski team jacket on.
Yeah.
And you shook my hand, and it was like, oh my gosh, she shook my hand. And I came back and I said to Jess, as my wife, I said, I met this lady named Kristina. I think she could be like a ski racer or something. And she's like, oh yeah, she's an Olympic athlete. I was like, that makes total sense. Like you can just tell. I mean, you're just such an athlete. It's incredible. So don't, you know, you say you're retired and washed up my butt. You still got it. You still got it. So you were in high school. Did you take like online classes? I mean, how did you get through school doing that type of activity?
I was fortunate enough. I went to a private school. Well, ultimately, I tried to go to public school because that was what I wanted. Because I wanted to. I was like, I want to go to the public school with all the other kids, and I'd gone to private school up until
and this
high
is
school.
Minnesota.
Yeah, in Minnesota. I grew up in Minnesota. Yes, and I remember going with my mom to visit the public high schools, and they said, well, if you how many days do you think you're going to miss? And she's like, well, probably 10 days. And they were like, you mean a year? She's like, oh, no, like 10 days. She's like, well, like 10 days. And this was when I was young, this was a freshman. So it was a little less travel. But she's like, no, like 10 days a trimester. Like, I mean, like there's no, she's going to miss a lot of days. Yeah. And they just looked at her and they said, yeah, no, she can't come to school here, which is so funny because now that is not the case, right? Like they would take the high profile athlete in a heartbeat, right?
In a second.
But I'm glad. I'm actually so grateful that happened. And I ended up staying because I went to a private Catholic school. And so I stayed there, and my teachers literally, some of them refused to teach me. This is true story. They said no. But most of them said absolutely, and and they tutored me. They tutored me in the summer. They would, because I was never there. I was really never there. Yeah. So they just worked with me, and I ended up doing school all year round so that I could graduate with my class. And I literally would go to teachers' homes in the summer, and they would tutor me through my class. And I kind of would do my classes in chunks, like, okay, we're going to do history for 6 weeks, and you're going to do it all, like the entire year in 6 weeks, And I had amazing teachers, and I was very blessed that way. And then once I graduated high school, it was like, all right, I'm out.
Wow.
Like I got other places to be. I'll be back to education later, The world education was waiting. So
did you go to college?
I did not, no.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, why do you need to?
Well,
you're an Olympic athlete in the Hall of Fame. Well, that's amazing. Tell me, Wisconsin. That's always been one that I don't get. Like, there's no mountains in Wisconsin, are there?
No, I didn't live in Wisconsin though.
No,
Minnesota.
I get them
Minnesota people. Like if there's anyone from Minnesota listening, I have your back. I will defend your honor. This is not Wisconsin.
Yeah,
Minnesota. There's a big rivalry there.
Well, there is. But it does seem like there's a ton of people from Wisconsin and Minnesota in this valley. We're in the Bell Valley, but anyhow, I always get it mixed up. But yeah, Minnesota. But there's no mountains there, right?
No, I mean we grew up on. They call it Buck Hill because it literally is a hill. But like Lindsey Vonn was from there. There's numerous athletes that made the national team. Honestly, the coach there is fantastic. He actually is still coaching. He's amazing. His name's Eric Seiler. He's an Austrian born. He raced, and then he came over to the United States and ended up somehow in Minnesota starting their racing program. And he is a huge factor in a lot of, you can go through the history of the U.S. ski team, and there are a lot of athletes that could point to him, whether it even just be a camp or they raced with him. But what I learned, I didn't really understand it. I really would give him most of the credit. But what I've been learning now that I'm actually coaching sports myself and my kids are in sports is like all the research they've done is that, why are the Brazilians so good at soccer, right? Well, there's all these, they get so many touches. They do this small areas game, and they get way more touches on the soccer ball than say the kids in the United States that are playing on this huge open field, and they kick the ball every once in a while, but then they're really just running around, right?
Yeah.
And so I think about that, and I relate that to ski racing, and I think, oh my goodness, I grew up on this hill where we literally took a rope tow up to the top. We would ski the gates down, up to the top, ski the gates down, and for hours, that's what we did. So like I think of the touches that we got, or the gates we got to ski, and it actually makes a lot of sense versus the kids that grew up here in Vail, where they have these amazing mountains. And their skiing is good. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's the only way, but it makes sense as to why there is success when there aren't any mountains, because you're right, there are no mountains. It's like 20 minutes south of Minneapolis. I mean, it's like in the city.
But what you're skiing on the competitive level is a hard pack, right?
Oh yeah,
What's
like
it
it's
called?
ice.
Hard deck they call it?
Oh, I don't know. Hard deck. I don't know. It sounds good. I like that. But they would actually.
Be careful how you say that.
That's true. Sorry. They would inject. They would inject ice, like water, into the snow to make it ice.
Because we just recently had Birds of Prey race in Beaver Creek, and they were. This is nothing new to you, but it was fascinating to me. We had a bunch of snow the night before, and they're shoveling the snow off the course so they could get back down to hard pack. We'll say.
Yeah, hard pack.
I don't want to mess up.
That's fine.
But so I guess Minnesota just had a bunch of artificial hard pack snow. It probably wasn't a detriment, right?
Oh no, we grew up skiing on ice, a lot like the East Coast too. And so when you came time to actually have to race on ice, we all looked at each other like, well, yeah, this is the normal, like no big deal. I mean, I remember practice wouldn't be canceled unless it was -30. So if it was minus 30 wind chill or minus 30 temperature, practice was canceled.
Well,
Otherwise,
tomorrow
we were
it'll be
racing.
canceled. I hear it's supposed to be pretty cold here tomorrow.
Oh my goodness!
Wow, that's fascinating.
Hence why I'm a fair weather skier these days.
Oh, I
the
doubt
sun is out and it's nice and warm. I'm like, okay, I'll go.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Aaron, what do you got? I can keep going. I don't want to keep you from asking.
I think there's something to that. I'm kind of taking notes on the Minnesota. Like if you had just that smaller. I grew up soccer too, and so kind of relating that to my very small experience with sports. But I wonder if like you have less time to get that practice in, then it's that much more important that you make it count. And so then now it's like you can do more with this little bit, and then expounding that to where, big competition. It's interesting that you relate that to, some of the success that you've had. And it also sounds like that coach in Minnesota, it has a book or movie coming or something about him. Like we need to look into this Minnesota Magic
He's
guy.
amazing. He really is. He is a character, and I love the guy. He really I think about the amount of time I spent with my family, and then I also spent a ton of time with him. I mean, he was a part of my career, and when I chose not to go to ski academy, a lot of athletes will go to an academy when they turn, like for high school.
Yeah.
And my parents asked if I wanted to go, and I was just like, no, I want to stay here. And so I remember making the national team and being on the road, and I would still call Eric weekly and just check in and just to hear his voice and his encouragement. And he just was a really, really big part of it for me. And now as I'm getting older, I love looking back, I guess, and kind of picking apart, like, well, what is it that made him or that made him so special in my life, and what makes him so special, and what makes him good, And what I loved is I realized he didn't change anyone. So, a lot of times you would see skiers and, they came out of, you could pick a skier. They came out of Mammoth Mountain in California because they all kind of have the similar style.
Okay.
Whereas Eric would take you and he wouldn't change your style at all. He'd say like, okay, this is the way you ski. Now I'm going to tweak that, and I'm going to have you do a couple different things within your style. And that's what we're going to focus on, because this is the way your body moves. These are your strengths. So like he did a really good job of, I think, and he still does, of seeing someone's strengths and keeping them on track, like not totally changing them, and just saying, okay, here's what you're good at. We're going to stay with that. And now I'm going to add a couple pieces in here and there. And I think that's why he's had so much success.
Man, there's a great analogy there with our faith.
Right?
I mean, how many of us try, especially we're talking ordinary discussions, ordinary men, ordinary women. I mean, how many of us try to be the person that is ahead of us? It's like, oh, well, that's their style. So in order for me to be effective at my ministry or what God's called me to do, I have to be like them. When the reality is, we just need to use what he's already given us, tweak it, and use it for his kingdom. I think we'd be so much more effective if we were all just true to who we've been made to be.
Oh, totally. I actually have my testimony ties into that, what you're saying right now. And I always really enjoy sharing it, because I feel like, especially going through those teenage years, and people can just relate, right? I love hearing other people's testimonies as well, but it's exactly what you said about being true to who we are, who God made us, instead of trying to be like somebody else or follow a different path, right? So when I was raised Catholic, and when I was 15, I got the opportunity to go to the Kanakuk camps in Missouri.
Okay, yeah.
I think they're in Missouri. And
is that on? What lake is that on?
I don't.
It's on a lake, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Anyway, and so I got to go there. I was on fire. Like, I truly learned what a relationship with Christ is. Instead of being raised Catholic, it was more, we just talked about God. Mm-hmm. Like in religion class, and at church, you just did what you were supposed to do, and that was it. There was no real relationship. Yeah. And so when I went to camp, I remember like really truly accepting Jesus as my Savior, and I mean, it was awesome. It was fantastic, right? I just had this, I was on fire for the Lord. And my mom, we talked about this going back, she reminded me. So I went to my camp with my Bible, to my U.S. ski team camp, and I remember sitting that night at dinner, and I was really young. One of the things you should know too is I was 15, and most of the girls I was competing with on the national team were 20, 21, 19, 20, 21, 22. So I was really, I mean, you think about the age gap there, right?
Huge.
And they were literally sitting at dinner laughing and talking about how anyone would be so stupid to believe in God. And I don't remember how the conversation came up, but I remember just sitting there silent, like, wait a second. Like, because all I wanted to do was fit in with these girls. I mean, that was what I wanted. Yeah. And my mom told me this. I did not remember this, but she told me I came home from that camp, I put my Bible away, and I never picked it up again.
Wow.
And it makes me like tear up because I just go like, oh, you know, you want to grab me and shake me,
tear
right?
Up.
I know.
Tear
Sorry. And
Come on.
so what was super interesting is how I get to look back now and how God he never gave up, right? He doesn't give up on us. And he just literally kept putting people in my path that eventually brought me back to him. So I'm 15 and this happens, right? So I just kind of shut down because I want to fit in. I just want to do what they're doing. And I can do this on my own. And I mean, let's be honest, the culture of the world, the culture of sports pushes towards, you got this. You're good enough.
That's right.
You can hold it on your own, right? Whereas we're actually designed by God to need him, to lean into him. And so it's the exact opposite of what we're trying, like the weight that you try to carry when you try to do it by yourself, right? And so I kept going through my career, and that's where I kind of was struggling. And I got to a point, I think I was like 20, maybe 19, 20, and I'd done well, don't get me wrong, right? I'm in the top 100 in the world, but I wasn't able to like succeed beyond that. And I was in New Zealand for a camp, and I saw this necklace, and it was this orange. It had these really cool orange stones, and it was a cross necklace. And I remember thinking, I don't know if I want to buy that. Like, what if people ask me about my faith? Like, I don't want to talk about that. But I thought, I just love it. I got to get it. So I bought it, and I'm wearing it. I get home from the camp, and I had a meeting with BMW to see if they wanted to sponsor me. So I was in Minneapolis. I had the necklace on. So I go to this meeting. We end up talking all about skiing, obviously, and about the sponsorship. Then at the end of the meeting, the gentleman says, well, can I ask you a personal question? And I said, well, sure, maybe, you know? And he said, well, your necklace, like, is it faith or is it fashion? And I was like, wait, this is what I didn't want to happen, right? So I started telling him, I was like, well, you know, I almost didn't buy this necklace. So I told him the story, and I said, but I believe in God. I just like opened up to this guy, right? I believe in God, but I don't know. I beyond that, I just don't really know. And he said, well, my wife and I would love you to come to church with us if you want, you know, and totally put the invite out there. I, of course, was terrified and started like kind of running the other way, but at the same time, it planted a seed. And then I remember praying and saying, God, you know, if you're real, like, then show me. I remember literally saying, like, sure, I know you're real, but like, I need something more. Yeah. And I was, in that sense, I guess I feel like I was a little arrogant, but 2 weeks later, I got a phone call from my uncle inviting me to come to church. I was like, okay. And then about a month passed, and I, of course, was trying to I just kept moving on. My life just keeps going. And as I look back, I'm like, oh my goodness, God just kept putting like a speed bump here, a speed bump here. He kept trying to slow me down. Like, look, you asked, and I am providing. I'm doing exactly what you asked.
How old were you at this time?
I think I was like 19.
Okay.
And so meanwhile, I have not taken the necklace off. Like, so I never, I knew when I look back, I'm like, he had me because I didn't take it off. Right. Yeah. And so I go into this dinner party with one of my sponsors. I believe it was like a Swix, the ski pole sponsor. And we're having this dinner, and mind you, like, faith is not a topic that comes up in the ski racing world. And I don't think it comes up in a lot of sporting worlds, not easily. It's not when I was there. And after the dinner, we were standing up by the bar, and one of the guys that works for the company came up to me, and he says, hey, can I ask you a question? And I said, yeah, you know. He said, so your necklace, like, I mean, do you wear it just because it looks good, or is it like really your faith? And it was like I got smacked across the face, right? I was like, are you serious? So then, of course, I told him the whole story about the buying it, and then the BMW meeting, and my uncle inviting me to church. And he said, do you mind if I send you a package?
Wow.
And I was like, no, sure, go right ahead. So a week later, on my doorstep, I get a package with the book that Rick Warren wrote, A Purpose-Driven Life.
Mm-hmm.
So I get this book, and inside of it, he has handwritten his testimony. And that was it. Like, that was the moment where I was just like, okay, God, I got it. I get it. I get it. Like, so I did that. I read for the 30 days. And from that point on, like, my journey that was the starting point for me coming back to Christ and now finding my own way, and doing things, the way God built me, not trying to do it like somebody else. So, I don't know. I guess a side note there, a little bit of a tangent, but
that is why you're here.
Yeah, but I love sharing that story because I think it's so neat it's so much easier, right, when we look back to see it, but to look back and see how God literally, I asked him and he straight up just kept putting people in my life, like, okay, here you go. I'll keep putting them there till you realize, like, I created you and I have great plans for you and I want to be there for you,
we, Kristina and I spoke this morning before the podcast, just making sure that I was going to lead us in the way that I didn't want to make her feel uncomfortable and say something she didn't want me to. And one of the things we said was, she was giving me a hard time and she's like, hey, is your audience big enough? No, you said your husband said to Jason, which, by the way, Jason, her husband, has been through Ordinary Men, was in a group I led. Jason said, he's a big jokester, was like, hey, make sure he tells you his demographics since he's having enough audience.
That's right.
And I said, we were joking back and forth, but we landed on this, and that was, if one person listens and gets something out of it. Absolutely. And I just have to say, I got something, and that is like the best question ever. The best question ever, which is that faith or fashion? Like, I'm going to use that for the rest of my life because, we talk about in Ordinary Men, part of being a disciple is sharing him, right? And man, I have the hardest time not sharing him, but finding a way to start the conversation, right? So it's not like, but man, there's so many people that wear crosses. There's people that have crosses on, that's the big tattoo now. Man, I'm going to use that. You just helped me share my faith with so many people. But I have a question for you. Okay. Where's the necklace? Oh, and what bums me out? A stone fell out of it, and I don't know. I think I was 26, probably 27, and a stone fell out of it, and I had more than enough things. Let me be honest. Like, we would get bags and bags of clothes, and I had so much stuff, and I was just like, you still get swag like crazy. Well, not nearly like that. Well, you still get swag. I see it. But now I have this gratitude for the swag, whereas before it was like, oh my goodness, I have so much stuff. Does anybody want anything, right? And so I tossed it, which is such a bummer because I would love to be able to like have it, and I would love to be able to still, even if I couldn't wear it, just to have it to go along with the story, but I do not have it anymore. I know, sad to say. I wonder if you could find something that looks very similar. Yeah, I could draw. I could paint the picture easily. I remember it so vividly. That'd be really neat. Yeah. But so you can use the faith and fashion, and then hopefully someday my girlfriends keep trying to tell me I'm supposed to write a book. I don't know. Here I am again, right? The Lord's probably putting things in front of me, and I just am going to look back and laugh at how many times he put the speed bumps out and I'm not listening. But I keep saying, like, oh, if I ever write a book, that's what it's going to be, the title of it, Faith or Fashion, because I love that. Oh, I love that. Yeah. Yeah, that's really great. So one thing we failed to mention early on is Kristina went through Ordinary Women with, who led that group? That was Lori Iverson. That's right. And so I think that's awesome. But I have questions about that, right? So I know you as Kristina Landa. I didn't know you, Kristina Koznick, right? I didn't know you in the heyday. Although I still am like awestruck, just so you know. And this is great. So many times I wanted to ask you a lot of these questions, but I'm like, I don't know if it's appropriate for me to like dig into her fast. Like I'm just so fascinated by what you accomplished. So this is so fun for me to be able to ask these. But how do you? So like it's called Ordinary Women, Ordinary Men, right? But yet there's people like you. Our last guest on the podcast was Eric Alexander, like very accomplished as well. I just bumped into him at the store on my way here, and I was like, "Hey, have you done Jeremy's podcast?" He said, "Yeah, I just did it. I just did it." So if you haven't listened, you should listen to Eric Alexander's. He climbed Mount Everest and led a blind man, broke multiple records. Unbelievable story. Yeah. And so, I asked him the same question. So you're far from ordinary, right? But you won't say that, but I'll say it. You're far from ordinary. You are extraordinary in what you've done. But wouldn't you say that you feel pretty ordinary when it comes to your faith?
Oh, I mean, I think, when you say someone says you're extraordinary, I mean, that's just a world, like it's just a world view ultimately, because what you're saying is extraordinary are really just a list of accomplishments things I've done here, right, on my time on earth.
Sure.
And for sure it's something to be admired. I'm not saying I admire people who have different things they've accomplished, but yeah, absolutely. When it comes to faith and even anything, I mean, even in my marriage, as a mom, as a parent, I feel absolutely ordinary sometimes, because I think I feel like, I don't know, ordinary can have a derogatory,
Oh, it can. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
they're
oh,
just
you're
ordinary.
just ordinary. Yeah, right. When really, we are all, we're all starting the same spot, right? Mm-hmm. And so, and we all have our struggles. I mean, we put people on a pedestal here on earth, but the fact of the matter is, only God knows what's really going on in my mind and in my heart, and the struggles I've had, and the things that are, that I deal with, or that maybe be difficult, and then things that are easy. I mean, we all have those. So yeah, I think I absolutely love the name of your organization, because I think that speaks to everybody, and even to someone who you may say is elite or has done something extraordinary. It's like, absolutely not. When it comes to faith, like, I love being joined with people who have had a totally different journey and a different road than me, because we still have the same faith struggles. We still have the same battles and the same things that we're going through. And so to be able to, we can relate on that level. Somebody may say, well, I can't talk to her because look what she's done. But it's like, actually, when we sit and we get to talk to about our faith, really, it humbles everybody, and it really brings you together, I think, in a way that nothing else can.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's multiple people that have been through what we've done that have done extraordinary things. But it's like every time I talk to them, when it comes to our faith, it's like the even playing ground for all of us.
Totally.
Right? And you know what I love about the name ordinary, and God put it in my heart, it's not something I conjured up, is it defuses pride, right? God opposes the proud, because grace to the humble. And it's like, man, if somebody can't do ordinary men or women because they don't feel like they're ordinary, then there's an issue, right? Because when it comes to our faith, we are ordinary without the power of the Holy Spirit in and through us. And that's what allows us to do extraordinary things for the gospel. And so I just always like to ask that question, especially for people like yourself that have been, on the highest stage, the Olympics, right? But yet you're doing this thing that's called ordinary. And I like that paradigm there. Well, we'll close up, but you had a recent kind of scare in your life. I'm curious what maybe you learned from it, or what lessons you took from it. But you had a stroke, right?
Yes, yeah, I did.
How long ago was that?
It was a year and a half ago. I was actually playing hockey on the deck with my son, and he was 9 at the time, and we were just doing slap shots. We were hitting hockey pucks, and we were waiting for my dad to arrive because he was coming to visit for the weekend. And I took a slap shot, and
by the way, how many moms are doing slap shots with their son? I love it. I absolutely love it.
Well, that was kind of funny, because when I got to the hospital, they were like, "You were doing what?"
I love it.
Typical
like, maybe
slap shot.
Right. I said I was taking slap shots.
shots.
And they said, well, maybe you pulled a muscle or something. I was like, no, nothing pulled. I didn't pull a muscle. But
how did it feel? What did it?
So,
I got all kinds of questions.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, so it's really interesting.
Sorry to be interrupted, but these are
no. Yeah. So I took a slap shot. I was totally warmed up. For anybody that's listening, that's doctor or nurse, or what I mean, because they're probably I would break it down, right?
Yeah.
I was I'd taken numerous shots. The day was warm and everything was fine, and all of a sudden. But it was loud. It was the slap shot was loud because it was on plastic. We were hitting off of a plastic piece, and so. And
because you're just so good.
Well, I don't know about that, but we were working on it. My son helps me. He coaches me a little bit. So, and so I took the shot, and all of a sudden I was I couldn't hear in both my ears, and my son looked at me and he's like, "Are you okay, Mom?" And he sounded like he was a mile away.
Wow.
And so I was like, "Oh, no, I'm not okay, but I think I will be." And as soon as I spoke, I sounded like I was over there with him. And I was like, okay. So of course I did what most people do. Like I thought, oh, I broke an eardrum or something. Like I'm thinking like the movies. Like I don't even know what a broken eardrum would be. Yeah. So I'm like feeling my ears to see if like they're bleeding or, which I don't even know if that happens. And
sounds good.
Right? Yeah, but that's what I assumed. So I put my hand up there because it got really hot on my left side and I didn't feel anything. And then I felt this like searing like heat go from behind my ear into my mouth. And then my tongue went numb and then it went down my neck. It was crazy. And it went down my shoulder, my arm, and into my hand. And I was sitting at this point now. And
just you?
And my son. That was
Sam?
it. Max. Yeah. And we were sitting there and I could hear. So my hearing came back and the pain moved. It didn't stay. And then all of a sudden though, I couldn't, like my hand wouldn't function. Like my left hand, I just couldn't move it. And my dad pulled up. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to shake this off. I'm going to go, and this is the athlete part of me, right? I'm going to
shake this off.
I'm going to just go see my dad. Everything's going to be fine. So I start to stand up and I'm a little bit dizzy. And I was like, I got this. I can do this. And I get down to his car and I gave him a hug and kind of explained a very shortened version of what happened. And maybe this is where I get it from. He's like, okay, sounds good. I'm sure it'll be okay. Yeah. And he said, I'm going to go check into the hotel. And I'm making this story way too long. So anyways, he goes and checks in. He goes and checks into the hotel and because he's going to come back for dinner. And because we have a really small little log cabin we live in, so we don't have a guest room. And so he leaves and I go upstairs and just like, okay, I'll make some dinner. So I start trying to make dinner, but like I can't even grab my phone. Like I'm not dizzy anymore. I have no pain in my head. My numbness was gone. But like from my elbow down, it was numb. And then I couldn't really move my left hand. And so I decided after about 45 minutes, I was like, all right, I should probably call a friend here. So I called, luckily this amazing couple, Christian couple, that they were military doctors and now they're doctors here in the Valley. And I coached one of their daughters in hockey. And so I had her on my phone and I called her. I was like, I'm totally phoning a friend here, but I need to know, like, I got to tell you what happened. And I love her because her style is more of like, hey, just sleep on it and let me know if in the morning it's bothering you. So I knew I wouldn't get like a big reaction out of her.
Yeah. But you did.
Yeah, I did. I did.
But you did.
She said, so my husband is going to head into work. He just got the night shift and he's going to come get you. And I was like, I'll just drive. I'll just meet him there. And she started laughing. She's like, you will not drive. She's like, I think you had a stroke. And I thought, no way. It's just my hand. Like, I'm fine. I'm good. And so I did go in and they did scan after scan. And they could not figure it out. They couldn't see anything. And my strength all came back within about like 4 or 5 hours. And so they said, well, you really need to go see a neurologist. So I, of course, took the weekend to hang with my dad and was like, I'll see him on Monday. It'll be fine. So Monday I went in with all my kids and you can attest to this. How many kids do you have, Aaron?
I have 4.
4. Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. So, and I'm in there with my whole gaggle, right? Like I go into the neurologist and he says, tell me what happened. So I tell him the story, just like I told you guys. Yeah, they know. So I'm just telling him the story and he looks at me and he says, do you have someone that could come get your children? And I was like, what? Wait, why? Just still like just going to power through this. Right. And so needless to say, my husband took the day off work, came and got my kids, and he put me immediately in like an MRI for my brain, like a scan of my spine, my brain, everything. And he came and got me before I was still changing out of like my gown and they were like knocking on my door and they're like, you need to see the doctor before you leave the building. And he brought me into his office and he said, like, you got to see this. Like, I cannot believe you are sitting here talking to me. Like, you have this, like, look, you had a stroke. Like, you can see it. They could see the white, like, glow, the little, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but so, like, when someone has a stroke. No. Well, I meant on someone else. Else. I mean, not to ever, never mind. That's bad. That's bad. But he said, I just can't believe this. Like, we got to figure out where this came from because ultimately with a stroke, the biggest concern is that the next one's going to be bigger.
Yeah.
And so there are only, 4 places. I can't list them I'm not a medical student, but there are only, I guess, 4 places a stroke can come from. So it's not like you're searching high and low. It's, okay, these are the things we got to check for. So I spent the entire summer wearing a monitor on my chest. Like, they were testing my heart. Yeah, everything, just trying to figure out, ultimately trying to race the clock. Like, okay, how do we figure out what's wrong or what happened so that we can prevent it from happening again? Yeah. And at the very end of the summer, they're like, we had nothing. Like, your blood is, I was a hematologist, cardiologist, you name it, I was there. And they said, we have nothing. We can't figure out what is wrong. The only option left is that you have what was called a PFO. And I will botch it if I try to pronounce it, so I'm just going to stick with PFO.
Yeah, I like it, PFO.
Yeah. And it is when you're between the 2 atrium of your heart, is the most beautiful thing, that when we are inside our mom's womb, the baby needs oxygenated blood, right? So this flap between the 2 atrium is open. And as soon as you are born and you take your first breath, the flap closes. Wow. I never knew that, right? Like, isn't that some, I just think that's fascinating, right? Like, God is so amazing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so,
all accidental.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Just bang, boom, bang.
Just happened.
Yeah. And so, but I just think I love telling that, because to me, the beauty of God just screams when you explain that. Like, I didn't know that, right? Yeah. So then by the time you're 2, it usually seals, and off you go. Well, some people, it doesn't ever seal, and this flap is actually open. And so it leaves room for, some people get like migraine headaches. They think, I shouldn't say that, they think, they're studying right now, because oxygen bubbles come through. But obviously, worst case scenario is a blood clot comes through, and a teeny one like mine, and it popped through, and it can cause a stroke. So they had to actually go in through my esophagus and look and like test to see if this was open. And sure enough, they were like, that is most likely where your stroke came from. So then the next step was going down to the big doctors, the big wigs. I mean, we've got big doctors up here, so I shouldn't say that, but going to the cardiologist in Denver, and them saying, okay, can we fix this, so that you don't have a stroke again? And I met with the doctors down there, and it was kind of up to them whether I was a good enough candidate, because it's a newer procedure. And I remember actually sitting with the doctor, and he said, he was just, he was really, he was an older gentleman. He'd done all the trials. Like, this was his baby, this PFO closure. And he was just very matter of fact, like, here's, super sweet guy, but also like a doctor. Like, he's got to tell me all the things. Like, this is the procedure. This is what it would be. Yes, you're a candidate. Do you want to do it? Kind of. And in the process, I mean, I do like to chat. So like, I found out he has 4 kids, and, but for the most part, it was me asking most of the personal questions. Right. Yeah. And, I felt like sitting there, like, I have to answer this question. Like, do I want heart surgery, and do I want them to put this device in my heart? And I just, throughout this whole process, I had to figure out a way over the whole summer and into the fall. I found when I would go into the waiting room or in the doctor's office, I would just, this anxiety would come. Oh, yeah. And the only thing that worked for me, which makes total sense now, what to calm me was, I just started praying for everybody in the waiting room. So like, when I'd sit in the waiting room, I'd pray for each person in the waiting room. When I'd stand up at the desk, I would pray for the person I was talking to at the desk. When the nurse would walk into the room, I would start praying for them. When the doctor walked in the room, I would just start praying for them. And what I found is, like, it just gave me such a peace, it was absolutely a blessing. Like, the Lord totally provided, right? Like, he will provide when we need, he will provide what we need, right? Yeah. And I needed more at that moment. And so and I tell you that because then you'll understand this part of the story, where I'm in the doctor's office. Now, mind you, I'd been praying for the nurse, and I'd been praying for the doctor while we were talking. And, the Holy Spirit was, I just felt such a conviction, because I was like, I had to answer this. Like, do I want this? Do I not? And the Holy Spirit was like, you need to ask him this question. And I just was like, oh, he might get, I don't know. I just didn't know how he would take this. Right. But I thought, well, I'm in, I'm all in. Like, I'm to the point in my journey now where when the Holy Spirit, like, stirs something in my soul, I'm like, all right, okay, fine. I'll go over there. Okay. And so I looked at him, and I just said, you have a daughter. And I said, if I was your daughter, if this was your daughter sitting here, would you have her do this? I mean, and he started to cry. Like he started to tear up, and he was just like, oh, well, yeah, yes, absolutely. He started listing all the reasons he would have his daughter do it. And I was like, all right, I'm in.
Done.
All right, I'm in. Here we go. Heart surgery, here
That's
we
a great
come.
question.
Yeah, so I was so glad I asked it, because I just felt like it made it more personal. And from that point on, our relationship was more personal, right?
Yeah.
Like even in the operating room and afterwards, it was just, I think he probably saw me in a different light maybe too,
Yeah.
So anyway, so I had the procedure, and I now officially have a device in my heart, which
Oh, really?
I do. It just doesn't do anything. Like rephrase that. It doesn't move. Like there's no batteries, or it doesn't have the only function is it actually just seals.
Keeps that closed.
Yes, exactly. Keeps that closed. So I
So
had
you
it.
had this all through your Olympics, all through
Yes.
your World Cup.
Isn't that crazy? Like my whole life. Yeah.
Wow. Hall of Famer with a hole in her heart.
Right. I know. And then I did ask him this. This is where a part of me wishes I could go back to training 3 times a day. But I did ask. I was like, so when you have fixed these in people's hearts, do they ever get stronger? Like, do they ever find get superhuman? And he said, well, I can't promise you anything, but he said, actually, yeah. He said, I have people who have been cyclists and things like that, and they said they can push themselves so much harder.
Come out of retirement.
Yeah, right.
Come on.
Right. No.
Well, we'll close with this. Did you learn anything? Like, did God download anything from you or to you in that process?
I mean, obviously. I mean, I think everything we each of us goes through so many different things in life, right? And battles and mountains we have to climb, and things that aren't expected, right? Just unexpected things that happen. And I guess if anything, he really just gave me a different perspective.
Yeah.
As far as I was very, very focused on my physical being, like on my physical makeup and how strong I was, how fit I was, and maybe a little too much. So I guess I feel like God kind of was like, hey, listen, you're in my hands.
Yeah.
And so spend the time with your kids, and if you don't get to the gym, that's okay. For me, that was probably the biggest thing.
I needed to hear that.
And I don't mean it take care of the body I gave you.
Yeah,
By no means I don't mean it like that, but it was a good eye opener for me to just take a different perspective maybe with that, and say, and also to let go. I like to control things. I'm a firstborn. I have high expectations for myself and for those things are going on around me. And so I like to control things. And so, I think if anything, other than the working out, just learning to let go and just say, God, I know you have this, I trust you, and I will do everything I can on my end, but I know ultimately my life is in your hands, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah. It's awesome.
It's huge. That's an encouragement too.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
This was such a fascinating podcast for me. I mean, I've known you for years, and yet I didn't know a lot of the things that we spoke about. I could have done 3 podcasts on the sports aspects and ask you a million other questions. But I'll tell you, in closing, I would say the thing that one of the big takeaways, other than is that faith or fashion. That's my new thing. But and I don't even know if you notice this, Aaron, and maybe you listening will notice or not, but I could feel it, the energy in the room. But when we were talking about the Olympics and the World Cup and ski racing, it was like you were happy to talk about it, and it was cool. But the second you started talking about your faith, it was like, boom, you're like on point. Like that's when you really came alive.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I don't want to read into it too much, but I think it's an encouragement for us ordinary people that have never been in the Olympics, you're not in the sports Hall of Fames or all these things, that I'm sitting next to somebody that was and is that person. And yet when she talks about those things, it's a joy of her life, I'm sure. But when she started talking about her faith and Christ, it was like, that's when she came really alive. And I think sometimes we can go through our daily lives and it's like, oh, I'm just a plumber, or I just do real estate, or I just do this. I'm not that important. These other people. But the reality is we have the most precious thing in the world.
Yeah.
Like we have the most precious thing in our grasp. And the thing that I know brings you more joy than any of those things that you accomplished. And so that encourages me to not always look at the past and what ifs and all those things. Instead, be like, man, I have the thing that matters, right? I have the gold medal in my hand.
Absolutely.
And so, man, very encouraging. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Aaron, anything?
I just stand by what I said at the beginning. Blessed to be on the podcast, learn. I feel like I got the inside scoop. I got like
That's
all
right.
of the nuggets like that other people. I got the newest edition, and I'm looking forward to reading your book when it comes out.
That's right.
Awesome.
Yeah,
All right.
Faith or Fashion by Kristina Landa. All right, guys.
Yes.
Until next time, let's do this. Thanks so much.